guys, next chapter of Wonder. We're up to page 103 and the chapter is called Genetics 101. I've eaten more Easter egg, so my throat is really dry. Gotta stop eating Easter eggs. Genetics 101. Both sides of Dad's family were Jews from Russia and Poland. Papa's grandparents fled the pogroms, I'm not sure what that word means, and ended up in NYC at the turn of the century. Tata's parents fled the Nazis and ended up in Argentina in the 40s. Papa and Tata met at a dance on the Lower East Side while she was in town visiting a cousin. They got married, moved to Bayside, and had Dad and Uncle Ben. Mum's side of the family is from Brazil, except for her mother, my beautiful Grans, and her dad, Augusto, who died before I was born. The rest of Mum's family, all her glamorous aunts, uncles, and cousins, still live in Alto Leblon, a ritzy suburb south of Rio. Grans and Augusto moved to Boston in the early 60s and had Mum and Aunt Kate, who married Uncle Porter. Mum and Dad met at Brown University and have been together ever since, Isabel and Nate, like two peas in a pod. They moved to New York right after college, had me a few years later, and then moved into a brick townhouse in North River Heights, the hippie stroller capital of the upper Manhattan, when I was about a year old. Not one person in the exotic mix of my family gene pool has ever shown any obvious signs of having what August has. I've pored over grainy sepia pictures of long-dead relatives in babushkas, black and white snapshots of distant cousins in crisp white linen suits, soldiers in uniforms, ladies with beehive hairdos, Polaroids of bell-bottom teenagers and long-haired hippies, and not once have I been able to detect even the slightest trace of August's face in their faces. Not one. But after August was born, my parents underwent genetic counselling. They were told that August had what seemed to be a previously unknown type of mandibulofacial dyssytosis caused by an autosomal recessive mutation of the TCOF1 gene, which is located on chromosome 5, complicated by hemifacial microsomia characteristic of OAV spectrum. Sometimes these mutations occur during pregnancy. Sometimes they're inherited from one parent carrying the dominant gene. Sometimes they're caused by interaction of many genes, possibly in combination with environmental factors. This is called multifactorial inheritance. In August's case, the doctors were able to identify one of the single nucleotide deletion mutations that made war on his face. The weird thing is, though, you'd never know it from looking at them. Both my parents carry that mutant gene, and I carry it too. Next chapter, the Punnett Square. If I have children, there's a 1 in 2 chance that I will pass on the defective gene to them. That doesn't mean they'll look like August, but they'll carry the gene that got double dose in August and helped him make him the way he is. If I marry someone who has the same defective gene, there's a 1 in 2 chance that our kids will carry the gene and look totally normal, a 1 in 4 chance that our kids will not carry the gene at all, and a 1 in 4 chance that our kids will look like August. If August has children with someone who doesn't have a trace of the gene, there's a 100% probability that their kids will inherit the gene, but a 0% chance that their kids will have a double dose fit like August, which means they'll carry the gene no matter what, but they could look totally normal. If he marries someone who has the gene, their kids will have the same odds as my kids. This only explains the part of August that's explainable. There's that other part of his genetic makeup that's not inherited, but just incredibly bad luck. Countless doctors have drawn little tic-tac-toe grids for my parents over the years to try and explain the genetic lottery to them. We did talk about this in school when we were talking about inheritance, and we were looking at eye colour and hair colour and how you inherit that from your parents. Can you remember when we drew like the genes on the board and we have 4 different choices of what it could be? I might do a little snapshot, or we can talk about it on Padlet. It is complicated. Geneticists use these Punnett squares to determine inheritance, recessive and dominant genes, probabilities and chance. But for all they know, there's more that they don't know. They can try to forecast the odds, but they can't guarantee them. They use terms like germline mosaicism and chromosome rearrangement or delayed mutation to explain why their science is not an exact science. Actually, I quite like how doctors talk. I like the sound of science. I like how words you don't understand explain things you can't understand. There are countless people under words, like germline mosaicism and chromosome rearrangement or delayed mutation. Countless babies who will never be born, like mine. Next chapter. There's a fly on my screen, sorry. Next chapter. Out with the old. Miranda and Ella blasted off. They attached themselves to a new crowd destined for high school glory. After a week of painful lunches where all they would do was talk about people that didn't interest me, I decided to make a clean break for it. They asked no questions, and I told no lies. We just went our separate ways. I didn't even mind after a while. I stopped going to lunch for about a week, though, to make the transition easier, to avoid the fake, "Oh shoot, there's no room for you at the table, Olivia." It was just easier to go to the library and read. I finished War and Peace in October. It was amazing. People think it's such a hard read, but it's really just a soap opera with lots of characters, people falling in love, fighting for love, dying for love. I want to be in love like that one day. I want my husband to love me like the way Prince Andrei loved Natasha. I ended up hanging out with a girl called Eleanor, who I'd known from my days at PS22, though we'd gone to different middle schools. Eleanor had always been a really smart girl. A little bit of a crybaby back then, but nice. I never realised how funny she was. Not laugh out loud daddy funny, but full of great quips. And she never knew how light-hearted I could be. Eleanor, I guess, had always been under the impression that I was very serious. And as it turns out, she'd never liked Miranda and Ella. She thought they were a bit stuck up. I gained entry through Eleanor to the smart kids table at lunch. It was a larger group than I'd been accustomed to hanging out with, and a more diverse crowd. It included Eleanor's boyfriend, Kevin, who would definitely become class president someday, a few techie guys, girls like Eleanor who were members of the yearbook committee and the debate club, and a quiet guy named Justin, who had small round glasses and played the violin, who I had an instant crush on. When I'd see Miranda and Ella, who were now hanging out with the super popular set, we'd say, "Hey, what's up?" and move on. Occasionally Miranda would ask me how August was doing, and then say, "Tell him I said hello." This I never did. Not to spite Miranda, but because August was in his own world these days. There were times at home that we never even crossed paths. Next chapter. Let's see how long it is. Next chapter, August 31st. Grans had died the night before Halloween. Since then, even though it's been 4 years, this has always been a sad time of year for me. For Mum too, though she doesn't always say it. Instead, she immerses herself in getting August's costume ready, since we all know how Halloween is his favourite time of year. This year was no different. August really wanted to be a Star Wars character called Boba Fett, so Mum looked for a Boba Fett costume in August's size, which strangely enough was out of stock everywhere. She went to every online store, found a few on eBay that were going for an outrageous amount, and finally ended up buying a Jango Fett costume that she then converted into a Boba Fett costume by painting it green. I would say in all she must have spent 2 weeks working on the stupid costume. And no, I won't mention the fact that Mum has never made any of my costumes, because it really has no bearing on anything at all. The morning of Halloween I woke up thinking about Grans, which made me really sad and weepy. Dad kept telling me to hurry up and get dressed, which just stressed me out even more, and suddenly I started crying. I just wanted to stay at home. So Dad took August to school that morning, and Mum said I could stay at home, and the two of us cried together for a while. One thing I knew for sure, however, is how much I miss Grans. Mum must have missed her even more. All those times August was clinging to life after a surgery, all those rushed trips to the ER, Grans had always been there for Mum. It felt good to cry with Mum. For both of us. At some point, Mum had the idea of watching The Ghost and Mrs. Murr together, which was one of our all-time favourite black and white films. I agreed that was a great idea. I think I probably would have used this weeping session as an opportunity to tell Mum everything that was going on at school with Miranda and Ella. But just as we were sitting down in front of the DVD player, the phone rang. It was the nurse from August's school calling to tell Mum that August had a stomachache and should be picked up. So much for old movies and mother-daughter bonding. Mum picked August up, and the moment he came home he went straight to the bathroom and threw up. Then he went to his bed and pulled the covers over his head. Mum took his temperature, brought him some hot tea, and assumed the August Mum role again. Via's mum, who'd come out for a little while, was put away. I understood though. August was in bad shape. Neither one of us asked him why he wore his bleeding Scream costume to school instead of the Boba Fett costume Mum had made for him. If it annoyed Mum to see the costume she'd worked on for 2 weeks tossed on the floor, unused, she didn't show it. That's it for today, guys. See you tomorrow.